Fleet Commander John Hale stood on the command deck of the Annihilator, his six-fingered hands firmly clasped behind his back as he fixed his gaze on the holographic image of the small blue planet. His exoskeleton gleamed under the ambient lighting, while the ceremonial conquest medals softly jingled against his chest plate as he inhaled through his primary respiratory slits. 10,000 ships, he mused, chuckling darkly. His laugh, gravelly and unsettling, echoed like stones grinding in a food processor. For this little backwater, Supreme Command must be out of their minds. Mark, his senior tactical officer, approached with a polite bow. Commander, the Conquest fleet is fully assembled and awaiting your instructions. All systems report battle-ready status. Battle-ready? John scoffed, slapping Mark firmly on the shoulder, causing the younger alien to stumble. As if we'll need to fight anyone. Have you looked over the preliminary scans, Mark? These Terrans are still burning fossil fuels. It's unbelievable. Fossil fuels. He shook his head, smirking. My waste recycler is more advanced than they are. Laughter erupted around the bridge. The Tharaki Empire had already conquered 37 civilizations across 3 galactic arms. Their neutrino compression drives had made interstellar travel as effortless as strolling across a room. Their quantum-phased weaponry could turn entire continents into glass, and their neural networks had the processing power to catalog the collective knowledge of most species. And yet, here they were, gearing up to invade a species that hadn't even managed to leave its own solar system. Commander, interrupted Communications Director Sarah Williams, her voice carrying the formal, measured tone of Tharaki military tradition. The Supreme Overmind has requested a direct communication link. John straightened instantly, his secondary heart beating faster. Patch it through to my private chamber. The rest of you, continue preparations for the invasion. I want dropships ready the moment we enter orbit. As John walked toward his chamber, he felt a flash of irritation. Why would the Supreme Overmind personally oversee such a trivial conquest? This hardly warranted the attention of anyone higher than a low-level administrator, let alone the leader of the entire Tharaki civilization. The communication chamber powered up as John entered, the air rippling as the holographic figure of Supreme Overmind Victor O'Neill appeared. The ancient figure, translucent and towering 14 feet tall, seemed to loom over him. Its neural tendrils swayed like underwater plants, shifting ominously. Commander Hale! The Overmind's voice boomed, echoing throughout the chamber. Our intelligence suggests you may be underestimating the task ahead of you. John struggled to suppress a smirk. With all due respect, Supreme One, I've conquered civilizations far more advanced than this. These Terrans haven't even developed basic telepathy. They communicate by forcing air through flaps of meat on their faces. It's beyond primitive. The Overmind's tendrils glowed with warning hues. Need I remind you of the Vorath Rebellion? They too appeared primitive until they weren't. John waved dismissively. A fluke. The Vorath were hiding technology. These Terrans hide nothing. We've been monitoring their global information network for decades. They broadcast their weaknesses like an open book. They fight over invisible borders on their planet, pollute their water supplies for profit, and half of them reject fundamental scientific principles. The Overmind's voice dropped into a menacing register. You will follow standard conquest protocols. No shortcuts, no assumptions. Full deployment. 10,000 ships may seem excessive, but are my orders unclear, Commander? The hologram swelled, filling the chamber with intense light. John immediately dropped to one knee, his mandibles clicking with irritation. No, Supreme One. Your will shall be done. Full deployment, standard conquest protocols. Good. The Overmind's form began to dissolve. Remember, Commander, there's a reason we deploy overwhelming force. No species surrenders its homeworld without a fight, no matter how outmatched they appear. As the hologram vanished, John stood up, his mandibles clicking in frustration. Political nonsense, he muttered under his breath. The Overmind is getting cautious in its old age. These Terrans will surrender within hours of our arrival. I'd bet my third liver on it. Returning to the bridge, John addressed his senior staff. What are you all standing around for, like hatchlings in a nest? Initiate the final jump sequence. It's time to add another primitive species to our glorious empire. As the vast fleet readied itself for the final jump to Earth, John settled into his command chair. This was going to be the easiest conquest in the entire history of the Tharaki Empire. The fleet materialized from hyperspace in flawless formation, a spectacle of military precision that would have sent most species scrambling to surrender. 10,000 warships, From nimble scout vessels to massive dreadnoughts capable of cracking a planet's crust, now encircled the third planet from a nondescript yellow star. Sensors report no space-based defenses, Tactical Officer Mark Stevens stated with a hint of boredom in his voice. No orbital platforms, no defensive grid, not even rudimentary early warning satellites. Just some primitive communications devices and weather monitors. John stretched lazily in his command chair, the creaking of his exoskeleton filling the silence. What a shock, he drawled, rolling all four of his eyes in mock disbelief. Next, you'll tell me they haven't figured out gravity manipulation. They haven't, sir, replied Science Officer Emily Taylor, oblivious to the sarcasm. She had recently joined the command staff and was still unfamiliar with John's communication style. John stared at her for several seconds, then burst into laughter. I know they haven't, Emily. That was a joke. Did they remove your humor gland during training? The bridge crew chuckled awkwardly, and Emily's skin flushed, shifting from its usual blue to a deep purple hue. Sir, Communications Director Sarah Williams interjected, we're detecting numerous transmissions from the planet. They've observed our arrival. Her tendrils rippled as she awaited further instructions. Over the control interface, most frequencies were filled with panic, but a few military channels were desperately trying to organize a response. A response? John laughed so loudly that his secondary lungs kicked in. Let me guess, projectile weapons? Chemical propellants? Actually, yes, Sarah confirmed, though they do possess nuclear capabilities. Nuclear? John mocked, raising his upper limbs in exaggerated fear. Oh, how frightening. We mastered clean nuclear fusion when my great-great ancestors were still swimming in primordial pools. Broadcast the standard surrender demand on all their communication channels. Give them the usual one planetary rotation to respond, John ordered, still chuckling. Sarah hesitated, glancing at the commander. Sir, standard protocol for first contact suggests... This isn't first contact, Director, John cut her off sharply. This is a conquest. We've been observing them for decades. We know exactly what we're dealing with. He waved a dismissive hand. But fine. Follow the protocols if it makes you happy. Send the cultural integration package along with the surrender demand. As the transmission was sent, John turned toward Science Officer Emily Taylor. While we wait for their inevitable capitulation, give me something interesting about this species. Anything at all that might make this conquest slightly less tedious. Emily quickly brought up her research files, her confidence returning as she focused on the data. Well, Commander, they are surprisingly adaptable. Their planet has a wide range of environments, from Arctic to desert conditions, and they've managed to survive in all of them. So, they're like cockroaches, John snorted. Hard to kill, but ultimately insignificant. Not exactly, sir, Emily continued, adjusting her tone. They show remarkable psychological resilience. Historical records indicate they've survived multiple near-extinction events, some of them self-inflicted. And their fiction, it's quite interesting. They frequently create stories where they defeat vastly superior alien invaders. This caught John's attention. Oh, do they now? He leaned forward, intrigued. How do these fictional Terrans defeat their superior alien overlords? Various methods, sir. Exploiting unforeseen weaknesses, using biological agents the aliens aren't immune to, finding creative applications for their limited technology, or simply through sheer determination and sacrifice. A silence fell over the bridge as the crew processed this information. John finally broke the quiet, his tone less dismissive. Well, it's a good thing we're not fictional aliens then, isn't it? Because in reality, superior technology always wins. He turned to face the main view screen, watching Earth in all its blue and white simplicity. The first response from Earth arrived precisely 7 minutes later, but it was not a surrender. Instead, they were firing missiles at the Annihilator. John couldn't decide whether to be amused or insulted as the alert warnings flashed across the tactical display. Actual chemical-propelled, explosive-tipped missiles? He said incredulously. Yes, Commander, Tactical Officer Mark Stevens confirmed, not hiding his smirk. Several hundred of them launched from various locations. Primitive nuclear warheads are set to impact in approximately 6 minutes. John settled back into his command chair, crossing one leg over the other. Don't even bother with countermeasures. Let's show them how feeble their resistance is. He made a lazy gesture toward the view screen. Shields at minimum. Let them see their best weapons dissipate against our defenses like rain against a window. The bridge crew relaxed, some of them even turning away from their stations to watch the commander's reaction to this pathetic Terran response. It was standard procedure during easy conquests, a morale-building exercise to witness the enemy's most powerful weapons fail spectacularly. The first missile detonated against the Annihilator's shields with a brief flare of light. The energy field shimmered momentarily before stabilizing. "Hey, did you feel that?" "I think I felt something," John mocked, pretending to check his console for damage. "Oh wait, that was just my mid-meal digestion." Laughter erupted across the bridge, but it quickly died when a series of alarms blared from multiple stations. "Sir," Mark Stevens' voice lost all traces of amusement. "5 of our scout ships are reporting shield failures." "That's impossible," John snapped, sitting up straight. "Their weapons are centuries behind our technology." Science Officer Emily Taylor was frantically analyzing the data. "Commander, the missiles, they're not just nuclear. They contain some kind of electromagnetic pulse, modulated to match our shield frequency," John roared, slamming his fist on the armrest. "How could they possibly know our shield frequencies?" "Communications." Director Sarah Williams' voice was tight with concern. "Sir, when we broadcast our surrender demand and cultural package, it contained our standard technical specifications. It appears they've analyzed the transmission carrier wave itself and determined our shielding resonance patterns in less than 7 minutes." John's disbelief was evident. "3 scout ships destroyed, sir?" Mark Stevens reported, his voice grim. "2 more heavily damaged." John's mind raced. This was unprecedented. No species had ever figured out Tharaki shield frequencies so quickly, let alone weaponized that knowledge within minutes of first contact. "Launch the first invasion wave," John ordered, his voice hardening. "Target their missile launch sites first. I want those destroyed before they can fire a second volley." The Annihilator shuddered as 500 dropships deployed, streaking toward Earth's atmosphere in a coordinated assault pattern. "Time to show these Terrans what real warfare looks like," John growled. "Activate the planetary display. I want to watch this personally." The holographic representation of Earth expanded in the center of the bridge, with red dots indicating the first wave of dropships entering the atmosphere. John expected to see the familiar pattern of initial resistance followed by rapid collapse, the norm for most invasions. But instead, the hologram began to light up with alarming yellow and red patterns as the dropship signaled distress. "Report!" John barked. Mark Stevens' hands flew over his console. "Sir, the Terrans are using a variety of countermeasures we didn't anticipate. High-powered lasers are targeting our ship's sensor arrays. They've deployed some kind of aerosol in the upper atmosphere that's interfering with our navigation systems." He paused, clearly confused. "And they're broadcasting some kind of signal. It's causing our neural interfaces to feedback." "They're jamming our neural interfaces?" John asked, now standing, his eyes wide with disbelief. "That's not possible." "They don't even have neural technology," Science Officer Emily Taylor spoke up, her voice faltering slightly. "Commander, I've gone deeper into their global information network. It seems they've been theorizing about alien invasions for centuries. They've constructed countless scenarios and countermeasures. Even though they didn't know aliens existed, some of their scientific communities have been working on theoretical defenses against neural technology, despite not developing it themselves." John looked at her, his disbelief evident. "So you're saying they've been preparing for this, without even knowing we existed?" "Yes, in a manner of speaking," Emily Taylor answered, regaining her composure. "Most of their research was theoretical, but they're rapidly adapting those theories into practical applications." On the holographic display, nearly a third of the first wave dropships blinked red, indicating critical damage or total loss. "This is absurd," John muttered under his breath. "They're savages. They still fight wars over borders, and their major powers can't even agree on basic planetary governance." "Sir," Mark Stevens interrupted, now speaking with a deadly seriousness. "Ground reports are coming in from the dropships that made it to the surface. The Terrans, they're not retreating." "What do you mean, not retreating?" John demanded, a hint of frustration creeping into his tone. "They're charging our position, sir," Mark Stevens replied, "with barely any protection. They're taking horrific casualties, but they keep advancing, and they're smiling while attacking." A chill ran through John's gut. He'd conquered numerous worlds, but he'd never seen a species smile in the face of certain death. "Recall the remaining dropships," he ordered, his voice now quiet. "We need to reassess." As the battered remnants of the first invasion wave made their way back to the fleet, John Hale realized with a sinking feeling that the Supreme Overmind might have been right after all. This would not be the easy conquest he'd assumed. 173 dropships lost, 312 damaged beyond immediate repair, nearly 2,000 ground troops unaccounted for. Admiral Vex, Admiral Samuel Richards, read from her datapad, her voice thick with barely restrained fury. As second in command of the invasion force, she was responsible for reporting the grim casualty numbers to Commander Hale. This is the worst first-wave performance in the history of the Tharaki Empire. John paced in the war room, the sound of his claws clicking against the metal floor echoing in the tense silence. The senior command staff sat around the strategic table, their postures stiff with anxiety. "Yes, thank you for that incredibly enlightening summary, Admiral Samuel Richards," John snapped, his mandibles clicking rapidly in agitation. "Maybe instead of pointing out the obvious, you could offer some actual tactical suggestions." "We should glass the planet from orbit," Weapons Master Grail Tavak suggested eagerly, his voice gravely excited. "Our quantum disruptors could turn their population centers to ash in hours. No more Terrans, no more resistance, and no more valuable resources or slaves." Science Officer Emily Taylor responded calmly. "Supreme Command was clear. Earth is to be conquered, not destroyed." "I don't care what Supreme Command wants right now," John shouted, slamming all four of his hands down on the table. "I care about not losing any more ships to a bunch of primitive monkeys with delusions of grandeur." The room went deathly silent. John knew that questioning Supreme Command's orders was practically treason. He took a slow, steadying breath. "What I mean is we need a new approach, one that will succeed without violating our overall directive." Tactical Officer Mark Stevens cleared his throat nervously. "Sir, I've analyzed the failure points of the first wave. The Terrans' countermeasures were unexpectedly effective, but they were also hastily constructed and improvised. If we adjust our shield frequencies and encrypt our neural interfaces, we should be able to neutralize their current tactics." John's voice dropped dangerously quiet. "So we will neutralize their tactics." "Better." John nodded, satisfied. "What else?" Communications Director Sarah Williams spoke up. "We've been monitoring their global communications. They're celebrating the retreat of the first wave as a victory, but they're also terrified. Many of their religious institutions are seeing record attendance. Their military leaders know they were lucky, and they're scrambling to prepare for our next assault." "Good," John hissed, his eyes narrowing. "Fear will make them sloppy. Admiral Richards, prepare a second wave, double the size of the first. New shield frequencies, new neural encryption, and this time, deploy shock troops first, followed by regular infantry. Let's see how these Terrans handle our elites." "At once, Commander," Samuel Richards replied, already tapping in the new orders on her tactical pad. "One more thing," John added, his voice cold. "No prisoners this time. Any Terran that resists is to be terminated. Maybe a display of our true power will convince the rest to surrender." 4 hours later, 1,000 dropships screamed toward Earth's atmosphere. The fleet had repositioned, moving out of range of the ground-based missiles that had unexpectedly proven effective. New electronic countermeasures blanketed Earth's communications, disrupting the coordinated defense that had been so effective in the first wave. From the command deck of the Annihilator, John watched, grim satisfaction building as the second wave entered Earth's atmosphere without incident. "You see?" he boasted to no one in particular. "This is how it should have gone the first time. Adaptive strategy, superior technology. They caught us by surprise once, but now—" "Sir," Mark Stevens' alarmed voice cut through John's moment of self-congratulation. "Multiple dropships are reporting catastrophic failures." John spun toward the tactical display, his confidence turning to dread. "How?" "Their missiles can't reach us here. Our countermeasures should be blocking their communication frequencies." "It's not missiles, sir," Mark Stevens reported, his voice thick with disbelief. "The Terrans, they've lined their upper atmosphere with some kind of reflective particulate matter. They're using our own energy shields against us." "That's impossible," John whispered, but the evidence was unfolding before his eyes. The brilliant blue-white flares of exploding dropships lit up the tactical display like a burst of fireworks. Science Officer Emily Taylor was analyzing the incoming data in a frenzy. "The particulate contains a metamaterial that amplifies and reflects our shield emissions back at a resonant frequency. It's causing a cascade failure in our propulsion systems," Emily Taylor reported, her voice quivering slightly. It's quite elegant, really. John gave her a look so intense that it could have melted steel. Elegant? He repeated, his voice sharp. In a terribly inconvenient way for us, of course, she added quickly, trying to salvage the situation. On the display, the dropships were plummeting toward Earth like raindrops. Some exploded in brilliant flashes, while others spun uncontrollably, crashing into oceans or barren regions. How many got through? John asked, his voice hollow, as the situation grew more dire by the second. Mark Stevens checked his readouts. Less than 40%, sir. And those that did are facing heavy resistance on the ground. The Terrans have adapted their weapons. They're using some sort of electromagnetic pulse generators that short-circuit our armor systems. John stood still, watching the chaos unfold on the tactical display. His well-crafted second wave was falling apart before his eyes. These Terrans weren't just lucky or determined. They were evolving, adapting, and learning at a terrifying pace. For the first time in his career, John felt an unfamiliar sensation creeping up his spine. Doubt. Unbelievable, John shouted, hurling a datapad across the command center. It shattered against the wall. Two waves. Two waves have failed against primitive apes who were just burning fossil fuels a few moments ago. The command staff stood frozen, eyes avoiding John's increasingly unstable gaze. The only sound was the constant barrage of damage reports and distress signals pouring in from the scattered remnants of the second invasion wave. Sir? Science Officer Emily Taylor spoke carefully, as if treading on fragile ground. I think I understand what's happening. The Terrans, they don't think like we do. John slowly turned toward her, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. Explain, he said, his voice eerily calm. They're not just adaptive, Emily Taylor continued, trying to steady herself. They're incredibly innovative when under pressure. Our intelligence reports indicated they needed years to develop and implement new technologies during peacetime, but that was before we saw how they react during conflict. She called up data streams on the main display. Look at their historical records. During global conflicts, they compress technological development cycles from years to months, sometimes weeks. This isn't an anomaly. This is their natural state when threatened. So they become smarter when attacked? Communications Director Sarah Williams asked incredulously. Not exactly smarter, Emily Taylor corrected. They're more willing to take risks. They try untested approaches, implement theoretical ideas without the need for years of testing. They operate on a good-enough-to-work-now mentality when under pressure, rather than striving for perfection. John's fury was momentarily overshadowed by a spark of genuine curiosity. No species behaves like this. Evolutionary pressure should make species cautious when threatened, not reckless. Yes, but Terrans evolved as pack hunters who thrived on cooperation and improvisation, Emily Taylor explained, warming to her subject. And there's something else. She hesitated before continuing. John fixed his gaze on her, sensing the importance of her next words. Speak freely, he commanded, his voice unnervingly calm. They're broadcasting messages directly to our troops, Emily Taylor said, uncomfortable with the situation. They've cracked our basic communication protocols. And what are they saying? John demanded, his expression already bracing for bad news. Emily Taylor looked uneasy. Most of it is the usual, threats, demands for surrender, but some of it is different. They're sending videos of our captured troops being treated well, given food, medical care. They're telling our soldiers that surrender isn't dishonorable. They're framing it as an act of respect, not weakness. Psychological warfare, Admiral Samuel Richards spat, her voice dripping with disdain. Elementary tactics, but effective. Desertion rates are rising among the ground forces, Mark Stevens noted, his tone quiet. Some dropships are even reporting that crew members are attempting to seize control of their vessels to surrender. John's complexion darkened with rage. Gallatin warriors do not surrender. Anyone who attempts to do so will be executed. Sir, Zenel interjected cautiously. There's more. The Terrans somehow obtained visual data of you specifically. They're broadcasting your image across the planet with a message. What message? John demanded, his voice icy. Sarah Williams activated a small holographic display, showing John's face from what must have been the initial broadcast when they demanded Earth's surrender. Beneath his image, words appeared in the dominant Terran languages. This is Commander John Hale. He sent 10,000 ships to conquer Earth. We are returning them one piece at a time. Want yours back? Come get it yourself. The command center fell into complete silence for several long seconds. Then John began to laugh, It started as a low chuckle, then exploded into hysterical laughter that echoed throughout the room. They're challenging me, personally. He wiped a tear of mirth from his eye. How perfectly, wonderfully primitive. They think this is about individual combat, about honor, about courage. His laughter abruptly stopped. They understand nothing about galactic conquest. Tactical Officer Mark Stevens cleared his throat. Actually, sir, I believe they understand quite well. They're attempting to provoke you into making a tactical error through emotional manipulation. And it's working. John roared, slamming his fist on the nearest console. I am provoked! I am emotional! Because no one in my entire career has dared to mock the might of the Tharaki Empire so openly. He stalked to the center of the command deck, his posture rigid with fury. They want to see me? Fine. Prepare my personal command ship. I will lead the third wave myself. A collective gasp filled the command staff. Sir! Admiral Samuel Richards protested, her voice sharp with concern. Protocol explicitly forbids the fleet commander from entering active combat zones until resistance is neutralized. Look around you! John gestured angrily at the display, which showed dozens of damaged ships limping back to the fleet. Does this look neutralized to you? We've lost over 2,000 dropships. 15% of our invasion force is gone, against a species that hasn't even mastered basic gravity manipulation. He turned toward the entire command staff, his voice low and venomous. The Terrans think they know psychological warfare. They think they can manipulate me. I'll show them what happens when they provoke a superior species. His voice dropped to a deadly whisper. Prepare. The Planet Cracker Weapons Science Officer Emily Taylor hesitated, her voice shaky. Sir, those are designed solely for uninhabitable worlds. Using them on populated planets violates at least 17 Imperial Ion treaties. John turned toward her, his fury boiling over. If we can't have this planet, no one will, he roared. Target their major population centers. Let's see how innovative they are when their cities turn to molten craters. As the command staff reluctantly began preparing for the third wave, John's eyes were fixed on the blue planet, his hands clenching and unclenching, almost rhythmically. You wanted my attention, Terrans, he muttered under his breath. Now you have it, all of it. The Scimitar, John Hale's personal command ship, led the third wave toward Earth's atmosphere. Behind it followed 2,000 of the fleet's most advanced vessels, carrying elite soldiers who had conquered countless worlds. Planet Cracker missiles stood armed and ready. Commander, reported Weapons Officer James Clark, his voice tight with concern, targeting solutions locked on Terran population centers, designated Alpha through Kappa. Excellent, John purred, his earlier rage now transformed into cold, calculating resolve. Hold fire until I give the command. I want them to see us coming. I want them to know exactly who is about to end their miserable civilization. Admiral Samuel Richards stood rigid beside him, her posture reflecting her disapproval. Commander, I must formally object once again. Supreme Command explicitly— Your objection has been noted and ignored, Admiral, John interrupted, his gaze fixed on the screen. If you want to file a formal complaint, feel free, assuming we survive long enough for you to submit it. He turned to Communications Director Zenel. Broadcast on all Terran frequencies. I'll deliver the message personally. Channel open, sir. John straightened, his tone shifting to one of icy authority. Humans of Earth, I am Fleet Commander John Hale of the Tharaki Empire. Your resistance, while briefly effective, ends today. You have one final opportunity to surrender unconditionally. Otherwise, I will personally oversee the destruction of your major population centers using weapons you cannot even begin to comprehend. You have 5 minutes to respond. Choose wisely. The command deck fell into a heavy silence as they waited for a response. John smiled thinly, imagining the panic that his ultimatum was surely causing among Earth's leaders. Sir, Zenel reported, breaking the silence, we're receiving a response, audio only. Put it through. The voice that filled the room was calm, female, and utterly unimpressed. Commander Hale, this is General Amara Chen of the United Earth Defense Force. We acknowledge your threat. Our response is as follows. There was a brief pause, and then a pounding beat filled the command deck, accompanied by singing in one of the Terran languages. What is this? John demanded, his voice tinged with disbelief. Science Officer Emily Taylor, monitoring from the Annihilator, quickly answered. It appears to be an ancient Terran battle song, sir, mid-20th century. The title roughly translates to Another One Bites the Dust. They're responding to our ultimatum with music. John's voice was incredulous. The music abruptly cut off, and General Chen's voice returned. That's our formal response, Commander. But since you seem to struggle with subtlety, let me be more direct. Go to hell. Chen out. For several long moments, John was stunned into silence. Then, his fury erupted. Fire the planet crackers now. I want their major cities vaporized. Sir, Tactical Officer Mark Stevens' voice crackled through the comm, panic evident in his tone. Multiple launches detected from Earth's surface, hundreds of them, different from the previous missiles. Countermeasures? Full shields, John barked. They're not targeting our ships? No, sir, Mark Stevens reported, his disbelief clear. They're targeting space itself, the area around our fleet. What? John spun toward his tactical officer. Explain. Before anyone could respond, space itself began to ripple around the invasion fleet. On the tactical displays, strange distortions appeared, bending the very fabric of reality. Gravitational anomalies. Massive ones, Emily Taylor shouted over the comm. They're creating artificial gravity wells all around the fleet. Impossible, John screamed. They don't have that technology. Sir, Weapons Officer James Clark interrupted, his voice strained. The planet cracker missiles they're not launching. Override the system! Manual launch! John commanded, his voice now desperate. I can't, sir, James Clark responded, panic rising in his voice. The launch tubes are experiencing gravitational shear. They're being crushed. All around the Scimitar, Tharaki ships were being torn in multiple directions. The smaller vessels were the first to collapse, their hulls crumpling under forces they weren't designed to withstand. The larger ships fought against the gravitational pull, their engines screaming as they tried to break free. Full power to engines, John ordered, gripping the armrest of his command chair. Get us out of here. The gravity wells are expanding, sir, Emily Taylor reported frantically. They're merging, creating a cascading effect. The mathematics are beautiful, actually. I don't care about the mathematics, John screamed, the scimitar groaning around him as its structural integrity began to fail. How are they doing this? They're supposed to be primitives. On the main view screen, the impossible truth became clear. Hundreds of small satellites had deployed around the Tharaki fleet, each one generating localized gravitational distortions. Alone, none would have been strong enough to threaten even the smallest Tharaki vessel, but together, they created a complex network, a gravitational web that was slowly tearing the invasion fleet apart. Sir, Admiral Samuel Richards said quietly, her voice heavy with realization as she stared at the tactical display showing the destruction of Tharaki ships. I believe we gravely underestimated the Terran capacity for cooperation and distributed systems. The Scimitar shuddered violently as its primary structural spine fractured. Warning alarms blared across all decks, and automated systems reported catastrophic failures throughout the ship. Abandoned ship, John whispered, his voice barely audible over the sounds of his command vessel disintegrating. All hands, abandoned ship. As crew members rushed toward escape pods, John stood motionless at his command post, watching in stunned disbelief as the Tharaki fleet, his pride and conquest, crumbled in front of him. The pride of the Tharaki Empire disintegrated around John. One ship after another vanished from the tactical display, not destroyed by superior weapons, but crushed by the very laws of physics, manipulated by a species he had only hours ago dismissed as barely sentient. Of the 2,000 ships that had formed the third wave, fewer than 300 managed to escape the gravitational trap. The rest, including John's prized Scimitar, were reduced to scattered debris, orbiting the deceptively peaceful blue planet. As his escape pod ejected from the dying command ship, Commander John Hale finally grasped the true meaning of terror. It wasn't found in the face of overwhelming numbers or superior firepower. No, it was the moment when everything you believed about your place in the universe shatters. John sat alone in the dimly lit communications chamber of the Annihilator, one of the few ships still operational in what had once been the pride of the Tharaki fleet. His exoskeleton was cracked in several places, and the ceremonial medals that had once adorned his chest were now lost somewhere in the debris field orbiting Earth. The pain from his injuries was nothing compared to the unbearable agony of his wounded pride. In mere days, he had lost more than 70% of his invasion force, 10,000 ships reduced to less than 3,000, many of which were barely functional. Hundreds of thousands of Tharaki warriors were dead or captured. It was the most humiliating defeat the Empire had ever faced, and now he would have to explain it all to the Supreme Overmind. "Communication link established, Commander," reported a subdued communications officer. Not Sarah Williams, who had perished with the scimitar, but a junior officer whose name John hadn't bothered to learn. "Leave me," John muttered, not even sparing the young officer a glance. "This report must be delivered privately." Once the chamber was empty, John activated the holographic projector. The imposing figure of Supreme Overmind Victor O'Neill materialized, its neural tendrils undulating with barely contained fury. "Commander Hale," the Overmind's voice was eerily calm, "explain to me how you managed to lose 7,000 ships to a pre-interstellar species." John had spent hours rehearsing this moment, preparing justifications, crafting carefully worded explanations. But when the moment arrived, all that came out was raw truth. "They are not what we thought they were," he said simply, his voice hoarse. The Overmind's tendrils pulsed red, the calm giving way to anger. "Elaborate." "Our intelligence was catastrophically wrong," John continued, no longer concerned with the consequences of his candor. "Terrans don't develop technology the way we do. They make massive, unpredictable jumps when threatened. They cooperate in ways we can barely comprehend." John stood and ignited a hollow display of Earth. "Look at them. They have thousands of distinct political entities, different languages, religions, and economic systems. They fight constantly among themselves. By all logical standards, they should have been easy prey, divided and conquered. And yet," the Overmind prompted, "and yet." "When we attacked, those divisions became meaningless to them," John explained, his voice heavy with bitter admiration. "Scientists who had been rivals for decades instantly shared research. Nations that had been enemies for centuries pooled resources. Military forces that wouldn't even train together suddenly operated as one." John laughed bitterly. "Do you know what they did? They took theoretical papers, concepts their scientists had proposed but never tested, and implemented them as weapons within hours. No testing, no safety protocols, no bureaucratic approval. They just did it." The Overmind was silent for a long moment. "You sound almost admiring, Commander." "I respect worthy adversaries," John replied, despite his wounds. "The Terrans are unlike anything we've encountered. They turned our own gravity manipulation technology against us, using principles our scientists proposed centuries ago, but deemed too unstable to implement. They developed countermeasures to weapons they had never even seen." He hesitated before continuing. "They captured some of our soldiers alive. Instead of executing them or torturing them for information, they treated their wounds, fed them, and showed them their culture, art, music. Some of our warriors are even requesting asylum." "Asylum?" the Overmind's voice thundered. "With primitives? Primitives who defeated the most powerful invasion force in galactic history? Primitives who looked at technology far beyond their understanding and refused to be intimidated," John corrected, ignoring the protocol. "Primitives who, even while fighting for their very survival, showed more mercy to our troops than we would have shown them." He gestured toward the view screen displaying the planet. "I don't know what these Terrans will become once they reverse engineer our technology, which they are undoubtedly doing right now. But I know this, they are not to be underestimated. Ever." The Overmind's form seemed to swell, filling the communication chamber with an overwhelming light. "Your recommendation, Commander John Hale, conqueror of 37 worlds?" John looked his supreme leader in the eye. "Retreat. Full retreat. Establish a quarantine zone around their solar system and pray to whatever gods you believe in that they don't decide to come after us once they master our technology." "You suggest we fear these Terrans?" The Overmind's voice grew dangerously soft. John thought carefully before responding. "No, not fear. Respect. The kind of respect you give to a force of nature. You don't fear a supernova, Supreme One. You simply recognize that standing in its path means certain death." In the silence that followed, John awaited his execution order with the composure of a warrior who had already accepted his fate. "Approaching unidentified vessel," the comm officer interrupted, her voice tense. "This is Tharaki Border Patrol Ship Vigilant. You have entered restricted space. Identify yourself immediately or be destroyed." The small scout ship hovered at the edge of the quarantine zone, its design suggesting a non-Tharaki origin. After several tense moments, a response came through. "Tharaki vessel, this is Trade Envoy Victor Voke of the Zintar Confederation. We seek passage to the system designated Sol 3. Inside the Vigilance Command Center, Captain David Anderson frowned at his communications officer. "Zintar? What business do they have here?" "Unknown, sir. They're a trading species, mostly harmless, but Sol 3 is absolutely forbidden territory." Captain David Anderson nodded grimly. "Open a channel." When the connection was established, Captain David Anderson spoke with the practiced authority of a seasoned border guard. Xintar vessel, Sol 3 is under Imperial quarantine by direct order of the Supreme Overmind. No exceptions, no visitors, no contact permitted. Reverse your course immediately. There was a brief pause before the Xintar vessel responded. We have valuable trade goods. The inhabitants of Sol 3 might find them. There will be no trade, David Anderson snapped, his voice trembling with unexpected emotion, surprising even himself. Return to Xintar space now, or we will open fire. The Xintar vessel immediately reversed course, clearly startled by the intensity of David Anderson's response. After confirming their departure, David Anderson ordered his second-in-command to take over the bridge and withdrew to his private quarters. There, he accessed a restricted file, one that every Tharaki commander was required to view before being assigned to the Sol Quarantine Patrol. The somber face of former Fleet Commander John Hale filled the screen. His once proud exoskeleton now bore simple markings as a military historian, far removed from his former role as a conqueror. If you are watching this recording, John Hale began, his voice laced with the weight of hard-earned wisdom, you have been entrusted with the most important mission in the Empire, to keep Terran humanity contained. David Anderson had watched this recording countless times, yet it still sent a shiver down his spine. 10 years ago, I led 10,000 ships to conquer what we thought was a primitive world. We returned with fewer than 2,000 ships, most of them severely damaged, not because Terrans had superior technology or overwhelming numbers, but because they possessed something far more dangerous: adaptability, unity, and an unwillingness to accept defeat. John Hale's expression grew more serious. Since our retreat, long-range monitoring has confirmed our worst fears. Terrans have already reverse-engineered much of our technology. What took us centuries to develop, they mastered in a fraction of that time. They've launched their first interstellar vessels, detected at the outer edge of their solar system. Based on projections, they'll achieve faster-than-light travel within a decade. The former commander leaned forward, his tone growing even more grave. Make no mistake, humanity is the most dangerous species we have ever encountered. Not because they're naturally violent, though they can be fierce warriors, but because they learn, adapt, and evolve faster than any species should be able to. Where they lack in natural abilities, they make up for with creative thinking and relentless determination. John Hale's final warning always made David Anderson double-check his ship's distance from Earth. It was as if the Terrans could appear at any moment. The quarantine exists not to keep humanity contained. That might prove impossible, but to prevent further provocation. We attacked them once, and they nearly wiped us out. If they come after us seeking revenge, no force in the galaxy may be able to stop them. The recording concluded, as it always did, with John Hale's grim warning. We sent 10,000 ships to conquer Earth. Only a handful returned. Let that be a warning to anyone who dares to follow in our footsteps. David Anderson closed the file and returned to the bridge. His resolve hardened. The quarantine would hold, not just for the safety of the Tharaki Empire, but for every civilization that made the mistake of underestimating the Terrans. Out in the cold void of space, at the edge of the Sol system, a small Terran probe silently recorded the entire exchange, adding the data to an ever-growing database of alien civilizations that humanity would one day encounter. When that day came, they would be the ones to make the first contact, and they would not come as conquerors.